Hail the Alliance and the Horde. I'm Joe. Here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And we're back. So, this week we'll be discussing Warcraft 3, which ironically is probably the most popular of the original RTS game series. And as much as it's got the best gameplay, I have to admit I kind of like the story and some of the characters from the first two a little more. But we're going to be discussing a character we've both wanted to discuss for quite some time. We discussed quite a while ago with the intention of kind of jumping between the different points of time in the timeline for Warcraft, but that proved too confusing, so we just ended up doing nothing but Warcraft 1 and 2 stuff. So now we're back to Warcraft 3 with Arthas. Prince Arthas of Lordaeron is a character whom, at the start of Warcraft 3, is already a bit of a tragic individual. Now, as a youth, he was racing around with his horse Invincible, but the horse got injured because of Arthas's recklessness, and he was forced to kill it himself. And then he buried the horse, and this memory remained with him. But he swore an oath that no one would have to suffer under his watch from now on, and that he would fight so that others wouldn't have to make the sacrifices he would. And so he donned a bat costume and began patrolling the streets of Gotham City. Oh wait, wrong hero! Anyways, back to Arthas. Not Arthas Wayne, but Prince Arthas of Lordaeron. Arthas, at the start of the game, is basically Uther's kind of apprentice in a way. And because this is a medieval fantasy setting, it's a very different type of relationship from, say, Star Wars, where you have the Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, or Ben Kenobi and Luke Skywalker kind of master and Padawan relationship. You have here a kind of military and political apprenticeship on the part of Arthas. Now, he's a paladin and a member of the Silver Hand, so this puts him under the authority of Uther. Uther is also a massively influential and popular at court politician and figure in Lordaeron overall. So what you have is Arthas is technically someone who should answer to Uther, but on the other hand, Arthas is an adult crown prince, and in many ways he's taken on a lot of the more martial duties of kingship since his father has grown too old to manage them himself. So really, Arthas should be in charge. This can only lead to a conflict for power. These two really can't actually operate together. The only reason they're kind of cooperating at the start is out of courtesy for Uther's vastly superior military and political experience. He does have a lot to teach his young charge. And Arthas, for his part, is someone who, because he's kind of still in a bit of I can't say squireship, but, apprenticeship, is still kind of having to abide by what his mentor says. The relationship between these three men, Uther, Arthas, and Tyrannus, is roughly similar to Henri III, Edouard I, and Simon de Montfort, or in English, Simon de Montfort, Henry III, and Edward I of England. Now, when Edward was a prince, he was essentially called Lord Edward. And Simon took power away from the king and onto himself, so it kind of developed a bit of a toxic bond between the three. Now, Simon did serve as a bit of a political inspiration for Edward, who took a lot of. Well, he basically learned a lot from Simon, is my point. And in this game, you have a similar kind of relationship, although Uther has not warred with the king. That must be emphasized. He did not take power away from the king, like by military force. He has not done that. But he has had a lot of untrammeled power. No one is more powerful in the realm than Uther, and no one has been more powerful than him for a number of years. Already, Uther's sister has had to kind of suffer because of this, because Tyrannus and Uther tried to push her into a political marriage she did not want. Arthas, for his part, as the male heir, kind of didn't have to go through this, but at the beginning of the game, you're starting to see there's an insecurity on Uther's part. Uther will not be able to contain this crown prince or control him for very long. And on Arthas's end, he's not going to long be satisfied with a position like just playing second fiddle or figurehead to Uther. So the men are headed for a crunch, or I should say a clash. And I know there's an idealistic outlook on this that, the two are bros, or Arthas was an ungrateful whelp, but I don't think there's enough analysis done of Uther, especially from a classic fantasy point of view. Under Howard and Tolkien's pens, we would see a much grayer type of Uther, and we'd see a very different point of view on the story, I think. And that's how I prefer to look at this story. And so you have Arthas, who's in a very weird position. He's not quite been recognized as a man, but he is a man. He's not a boy. And he's beginning to accrue a lot of military experience. And the lords of the realm and many of the people in the realm are looking more and more to him. And it's only natural because he's the future king. And he is a decisive, strong, fearsome young man. And arguably, much as we all like Varian Wrynn, I would argue in some ways Arthas at the start is supposed to be a much more charismatic, fierce individual. And that's only because I feel that we need to highlight how far he falls from grace, so that he starts higher but falls lower. Because we do have to contrast him with Varian. The two are kind of similar archetypes, but they go down very different paths. And I'm not going to lie, like most people, I actually like Arthas a lot more as a character. I find him much more interesting than Varian. Then again, I find Arthas is probably the most interesting character in Warcraft history after Doomhammer. But Arthas is ultimately a much more tragic figure, and a ultimately doomed one. He's a bit of a shadow King Arthur. And I would argue the Greek tragedy that surrounds him is not simply his fault alone. You've got a lot of contributing factors. You have Jaina, you have Uther, you've got Melganus, you've got so many characters just contributing, if inadvertently, and in their own small ways. And the thing is, Arthas never originally had any intention to do harm to Lordaeron. So, Warcraft 3 is telling a very tragic, very deep story. And it's one where we have a young, bright hero who, at the start, has obviously endured a bit of trauma regarding the loss of his beloved horse. The breakup with Jaina obviously left some unresolved issues between the two. Jaina herself is a very hesitant character who I would argue lacks the determination and resolve of a character like Samwise Gamgee, and also lacks quite a bit of the backbone that even arguably Thrall has. Thrall does have one deep down. Jaina doesn't. So you're looking at someone who's used to letting others make decisions for her. You've got Arthas, who has to deal with his unresolved feelings for her and her kind of reluctance to resolve those issues. So there it's already something that can't really have a good ending to their relationship or their non-relationship now. So you got politically, things are not looking good, in my opinion, because you got Uther who's used to having sway, and you've got Arthas who kind of wants to break off into his own. So to the people, they may not realize it yet, but you already have two growing factions at court. And this is this stage that's being set at the start of Warcraft 3. When Medivh arrives on the scene, any thoughts on the different characters and players at the start of the game, when at least vis-a-vis Lordaeron?
I honestly always liked Arthas, and
okay,
he was essentially a household name. He was Warcraft.
Yeah, there was I think what people today forget is that in 2003, Arthas was a runaway success as a character, and that he was the most popular fantasy gaming character for a long time. For a good 5 years, no one was more popular than him. And I would argue in some ways, at least in some places, he was more popular than characters like Batman. The guy was freaking popular. But this just goes to show the mismanagement and stupidity at Blizzard, when they not only mismanaged it, but they basically let Arthas's popularity flounder and just threw it away. So you had very little business sense at Blizzard, even as you had some who could tell a really great story. And Metzen, I will actually compliment as someone who pushed a letter and did a lot of great work. And obviously with the Wrath of the Lich-King, the intention was to resolve the story. You have a beginning, which is Warcraft 3, then you have the Frozen Throne, which is the middle, and then you have Wrath of the Lich-King, which is the end. Beginning, middle, and end. But the thing is, rarely do I think you should milk a character, but Arthas was a character they needed to milk, and they didn't. But you can't really blame it on Metzen. He clearly wanted to move to other things, but they needed to also have something happen after Arthas's death. Not involving Arthas, but they needed to tell a story on that same scope and level, but they didn't. And arguably, they ran out of ideas at that time. And I would argue the story of Warcraft ends with Wrath of the Lich-King. There's nothing afterwards. Everything afterwards is boring and doesn't matter. That's the problem. It cannot match the scope and the scale or the tragedy. And, you want something on the level of Lord of the Rings or something. But instead we went from that to Care Bears. And that's the weird thing. Now, I can't fully blame Metzen. He told his story. And it was an epic story. So he did his job. But the trouble is, for some reason, I think Blizzard just fell off the wagon.
They had their Raceland Magier.
Yeah.
But instead of really focusing on him, they essentially did the equivalent of focusing on Riverwind.
Yeah, very aptly put.
When
nobody cares about Riverwind.
Yeah, Dragonlance, they went into Raceland. They milked him to the point where they couldn't anymore.
Actually, yeah. And that's the thing. Whereas with Arthas, they could have milked him some more, but they didn't. And
You were a gamer, you loved fantasy, you knew who Arthas was. Even if you were essentially a Tetris gamer.
yeah, and I kind of have the feeling that they should have maybe made a separate fantasy RTS game series with a different universe. You know, where they have Warcraft, they have another universe, and maybe a third one, and they tell different stories.
It's like you shouldn't have Soul Calibur of all series doing Arthas' story far more properly and milking that.
What do you mean?
Soul Calibur has
With
this
which character?
Soul Edge. They had the paladin, the big King Arthur type, put the character Siegfried.
Oh, well, I don't know if that's entirely the same here. But I don't think Soul Calibur followed the same story beats, and I actually think Arthas' death when it happens is appropriate. I actually prefer that. My point is more to get into the middle period, in the middle, like between Warcraft, the Frozen Throne, and Wrath of the Lich-King. There should have been more Arthas in there.
Yeah.
And in terms of novels and comics, they should have expanded on the character. That's my point. I even think that they should have gotten into a movie about him, because this is clearly a popular breakout character. And you milk your breakout characters. Anyways, tell us what you think. And also, don't forget to check out our Substack, where we write a ton of fantasy stories, which are getting pretty well reviewed. So do smash that like, that subscribe button, and stay tuned for more.